Call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. And get started. Request for approval of minutes, August 19, 2021. A motion on the floor.
Second.
Properly seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're going to move to number 2. Still going to be discussion on the allocation capacity, but a little different twist that we'll let is it Chuck or who's talking? Chad.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, want to update you on the flow factor reduction request effort that's been ongoing. It can probably best be described as a simple, what should be a simple process that has been made very unsimple by the state. As you know, we submitted back in April of this year what we felt like was a very thorough evaluation of the wastewater systems within the county, and submitted that request to the state that we felt met the statute as it was written, the intent of the statute. The state came back with some very unusual comments and requests from us with that. We scheduled a virtual meeting with the state, had discussion with them, got feedback. They gave some guidance on their thoughts and their interpretations of things. Chuck, who's here tonight, to help answer any questions, went from that and put together several different scenarios trying to interpret their requests. Submitted that to the state, finally had a discussion with the state earlier this week, and they went further into left field with some requests. We feel like they've completely deviated, since it's from the nature of the statute as it's written and the intention of the statute. Long story short, we did have 2 scenarios they asked us to run. The statute clearly states you take the wettest month of the year, the previous 12 months, looking at average daily flows. You adjust that for seasonal variations, for excessive I&I, in situations such as that. It so happens for us, the majority of our jurisdictions, the max month was a month with a hurricane in it, which is no surprise when it comes to your max month. That event resulted in some extreme wastewater flows. We adjusted those flows, or Chuck and his team adjusted those flows for that excess I&I, ran the numbers and came back, and there were numbers the state said that they don't agree with. That doesn't seem right for Traverse County. Those numbers were very much in line with what is received around the state and has been obtained around the state. There were nothing unusual or unreasonable. They've since come back and said to take a look at the second wettest month of the year, which is not within the statute. It's not the intent of the statute. Just take a look at the second wettest month of the year. We did that, ran that evaluation. It came back with some resulting in varying months being studied for or looked at for each jurisdiction, and came back with numbers that varied significantly across the jurisdictions. For example, the gallons per bedroom per day number for Concord was 82. It was 68 for Kannapolis. It was 58 for Harrisburg, and 93 for Mount Pleasant. So you had some pretty extreme variations there, okay, across the board. We think there's a reasonable chance that the state may accept that, being that they requested us to do it that way. And it does have a negative impact overall to how much capacity we free up of about 7-8%. So I think, 70, 80,000 gallons is significant, but it's game changing with what we're doing. The other option they wanted us to run was to take the 3 wettest days of the year, minus the hurricane, and run the scenario with the 3 wettest days of the year. Now that came out with almost uniform across the board, about 100 gallons per bedroom per day. Okay. Everybody that deals with wastewater on a day in, day out basis knows that's not an accurate number. That's not a reasonable number. That makes no sense. It completely has deviated from the statute pretty much in all ways as it's laid out. So I wanted to update the board with that. I wanted to get the board's feedback, because really we have 2 options. We can try to submit to the state for their, we would do it before making a formal submittal to the state. We would ask for their head nod that will work. On the option that would end up with us getting still a good reduction, but not as good a reduction, or we really have to just go over these people's heads, politically or whatever the case might be there, to challenge that. So wanted to get the board up to speed on that, let you guys ask questions of myself and of Chuck, kind of have a discussion on that, of kind of some direction on how, we should proceed with this effort.
So what was the problem with the wettest day, the hurricane month, the wettest month?
Well, it just created, so if you did it with the hurricane included, for example, Concord's number was 172 gallons per day per bedroom. Just astronomical.
That would backfire quite a bit.
Yeah. And I'm not singling out Concord. Everybody's was 130, 150, 180. I mean, they were all very, very high for that if you would have not adjusted for that hurricane impacts. And I don't remember the rainfall numbers, but they were magnitude of 5-6 inches over like a 2-day period. I mean, definitely not a 5-year storm or a 2-year storm. I mean, definitely a much bigger storm than that.
Is the data set a look back? What's the time frame? Just 1 year?
Previous 12 months. So,
I mean, is it a 5-year look back a more accurate depiction of, with some sort of growth factor or something? It just seems like 1 year can be such an anomaly.
It can change dramatically.
And that doesn't seem to paint the real picture, but a 5-year look back would, wouldn't it? I mean, sort of deal with the peaks and valleys and the sort of bigger picture.
And I think fundamentally, and it's an issue, I think, with the way the statute's written, we're all have to report on monthly average daily flows, pump stations, plants, whatever it is, it's monthly average daily flows. But then when you're taking a look and say you got to look at the 3 worst days in your worst month, you're like stacking conservatism on top of conservatism. So that's why I think the statute clearly lays out that not only should you adjust for I&I, but also seasonal variations, and that you've got to take those numbers. So you're not cherry picking the best data of the year. You are taking data that's going to build some conservatism, but then you use your engineering judgment and experience to adjust those down for the excess of I&I that's just unreasonable from a normal day in and day out rainfall that we get in our area. And they have a very different view of that.
So what was their rationale, pardon me, for not accepting the data that was submitted?
Great question. I wish I really knew what the rationale was. The way the rules are written, it's pretty clear that the flow from an individual residence is intended to reflect the actual flow from that residence, not infiltration and inflow within the system, but the actual flow. That's the whole entire administrative code is written about that concept. This is how much wastewater comes from a restaurant, this is how much comes from a house. And then we have these design standards, as Chad said, we're designing for monthly flows at the waste treatment plant. We're designing for some peak factor flow in the collection system. And we take that average daily flow and multiply it by 4 to design a sewer. And the state is saying, we want you to go ahead and multiply it by 4 and then multiply it by 4 again. So it's just completely beyond any kind of rationale that I can come up with for reasoning. Other than the fact that it's sort of just painfully conservative. And they're not willing to stick their neck out on anything. So,
But that may not be their prerogative as to whether they stick their neck out about something. And the statute requires them to act in certain ways. And so I understand.
Unfortunately, it's not that well written. I wish it was. But this particular section of the administrative code says that they should make reasonable adjustments.
Well, that can play to our advantage if we play that right. If it's that vague, if there's a lot of vagueness to it, then that's where your option of getting polluted.
Unfortunately, as we summarize it as a subjective determination, and they didn't make the determination.
Yeah, but there may be some pressures for them to.
I mean, but they didn't lay out a rationale as to why they didn't accept our first set of data that we submitted.
They think that peak flows, I&I, should be somehow included in the calculation. And okay, how? And then they, as Chad said, they gave us 4 or 5 different scenarios they want us to run. They're just feeling around until they get something that feels comfortable. And I'm just like, that's just not reasonable. That's not the way the rule is written. And that's not the way it's been applied historically. And we have some new people in this role doing this, and they just don't.
And in an effort to educate them a little bit on why what we originally did worked, the 70 gallons per day really makes sense. Chuck went back and looked at that wettest month of the year, and you leave the storm event in. We're just looking at the average daily flow for that month, okay? And it comes out to 52, I believe was right, 52, 54 gallons per day per bedroom. If you look at that 12-month data set, which we all know, I've said it plenty of times, last year was very wet. We had higher flows than normal. But if you look at that average daily flow for the entire year, no I&I removed, no adjustments for I&I, it's 48 gallons per day per bedroom. Okay? So a 70 gallon per day bedroom has conservatism in it already of a pretty good order of magnitude. You know, you've got a 1.6, 1.7 peaking factor built just in that number. So I think those numbers actually justify the fact that maybe 60 or 65 is a better number, but 70 is conservative. They do not appear willing to budge. So what we wanted feedback from the board was the quickest path to getting a number and opening up some capacity is to try to get them to agree with our numbers on option 5 that we're calling it now, which would result in the varying number for each jurisdiction. That would still open up close to 1 million gallons of capacity on paper. That would not make that capacity go quite as far for some jurisdictions, but it would provide an immediate benefit. If we go the political route, if we go over them route, we may be able to get wrap this up in 30 days, 45 days, maybe. I don't know that. We may be able to wrap this up sooner if we play their game. If we challenge it, it may take longer. That's another thing to complicate it a little bit.
Chuck, you mentioned that everybody there was new. Is there no old heads that are in that department anymore that have helped create these other scenarios for other communities along the way?
I don't know the whole staff there. I just know the leadership and the person that was assigned to doing these is a different player than we talked to 2 years ago when we started this process. And another flow reduction request that I've done is different folks.
2019 Union County had one approved at 70 gallons per day per bedroom, and that was a different supervisor at that time, different person approved.
Does that supervisor still work for the department?
Have we seen that application, or can we, I mean, does,
Likewise, the one that I did one for Gaston, Mount Holly, a couple of places.
in your opinion, are they all very similar?
Oh, very similar. Oh, they're very similar.
We're not reinventing the wheel, but they're reinventing the wheel. We're not.
And they're all consistent with what the administrative code says poorly and the intent of the administrative code, which is actually pretty clear.
I'm sure there are a few developers in our community that wouldn't mind making a few calls, but that can get really messy really
Yeah,
fast.
so keep in mind, these are the same people that are your permit writers.
Right,
So-
right.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
the difficult part is we need them to write another permit.
Now, one thing that should be not said and known, we can turn around 18 months from now and go through this process again if we have a drier period of weather that favors us. The cost to run the numbers and look and see if it's worthwhile is a $10,000 task. It's not, we're not talking about a big master plan or anything. It's a very straightforward, especially now that everything's set up the way it is, for Chuck to be able to take a look and say, hey, they'll agree to what they agreed to last time. You guys can save 10 gallons a bedroom if using the last 12 months data set. That is still an option. Union County, I believe, has had 2 or 3 changes to theirs in the last 10 years. So that's it's not once you do it, it's yours for forever. It's you can edit that as you go or refresh it as you go. We are working off a not a very good data set with the last year of rainfall that we've had.
What month was that wettest month?
Let's see, for Concord, it varied. I think it was May.
This November storm, hurricane Ada.
Yeah.
Was one of the big.
Yeah, I would have to.
Well, that's fine. I was just curious how long we were away from being a year away from that month.
We actually revised the data set once. We started off with the previous calendar year. We lopped off another one of that, which was pretty significant also. But these hurricane events, if you do the analysis based on the wettest days of the wettest month, you're actually looking at the wettest days of the year.
Yeah.
And all you have to have is one hurricane in that 1 year period, and you'll see some spike. But that's not supposed to be the design basis for collection systems.
Right.
And for this is literally the set of the administrative code entitled waste not discharged. So this is the collection system pump station kind of analysis, and it's completely misapplied in their interpretation of the rule. So
if we push forward, like you're talking about this option 5, I mean, each jurisdiction has a different allocation.
Amount per bedroom, which does not cause problems from a paperwork standpoint or a management standpoint.
It's a number we use all the time.
Yeah, it's not, it wouldn't create an issue there. It would just mean that a 4-bedroom house being built in Concord would take up more paper capacity than a 4-bedroom house being built in Harrisburg. But one in Mount Pleasant would take up more than what's being built in Concord. It's still better than 120 gallons. Even Mount Pleasant's getting it's only 75% of it. So you're still getting it still helps, but it's not quite as good as the 70 across the board.
If we agreed to go with revision 5, how long will it take to get an approval?
that's a great question. So I try.
I've been thinking all day.
I'll ask questions like that, and I either get
And they look at you like I'm looking at you.
they either say we can't tell you, or it might be a few months. You know, those kinds of answers. We do know it's a hot topic for them now. We're hitting it every time they will talk to us. So I would hope that they would push it to the front of the file.
Do we know if anybody else is in the same boat asking for it currently?
I don't know.
I mean, it'd be good to know if they're.
Well, I know Charlotte Water is submitted. Charlotte Water is submitted kind of at the same time.
There's one of the great ironies of this is the Charlotte Water submittal. The system that is tributary to WSACC is mostly newer stuff, and it didn't respond over the last year to the storm events nearly as much as some of the older systems here in the county. And so their number is considerably lower. And we say, why do we believe that a house built in Concord contributes more wastewater than a house built just over the line? We're trying the same house, same builder.
And we've tried to make sure they understand we're building new. This is for new systems,
and we're analyzing an old system.
Yeah, all the growth is
right.
Right. There's some areas of illogical things here that it's really hard to describe the frustration.
So they don't even get that this is all clean new systems.
Yeah.
So there should be very little peaking factor.
It has been
tight.
shared. Yes, it has been shared.
So
Many times.
the option of, I mean, I can see maybe one part of their stance is to offer up these suggestions to get us to willfully agree to something they're more comfortable with. But I mean, if we say no, we did our study, we believe in 70, I mean, that's just either going to take forever or they're just going to blatantly say no, or.
You just say no. If we say we want this or nothing, they just say no.
That'll take
At that
2 or 3
point, then it
months to
goes
get there, and then we're
political.
back to square one again.
It may take 2 months for you.
And another very important thing with what we've experienced here, they could come back and say, we really like that. The 82 number for Concord, we can agree with that. The 93 for Mount Pleasant, but we cannot agree to the 58 for Harrisburg. That really needs to be more like 78. I mean, that's what we've experienced so far. I mean, it really is.
We're totally off script here.
So, and I think it's really caused confusion and maybe a challenge within their mind that there's kind of 4 systems being looked at here together and how WSACC functions. And well, I don't know if that's causing significant challenges to them in their minds. I don't understand how they're making this so much more complex than it needs to be. But I wanted you guys to fully be aware. It would be my recommendation to the board that we submit this option 5 and see what feedback we get from them on that. We very well may get feedback, just like I just said, that we agree with the Mount Pleasant and Concord number, but not the Kannapolis and the Harrisburg. Well, if they do, then we got to fight on our hands at that point. You know, we've got to back up and look at this from a different angle and probably go over their heads, because now there's really no rationality used that could even be understood at that point. If they can agree to that, and we can push them to try to get something in hand within the next 30, 60 days, that does open up a big chunk of capacity that's needed at this time. And then we can always sit back, and next June we'll drop off that May. That's a bad number for several of our jurisdictions, and we could look and see at that time what do our numbers look like then, and consider a resubmittal as early as that if it needed to.
At what point are you envisioning that we're going to be starting a submittal for a new permit, not the one that gets us to 34, but the one that takes us past that? We talked about doing those almost simultaneously.
Correct.
So I'm trying to figure out how long before we need these people in order to say yes on our permit. And who knows, maybe there'll be a change, transition to more people and different people and all that kind of stuff. And then my second question to this is it valuable enough for us to take all the details, put them out so it's nice and easy for everybody, or for at least one person to understand, and go to Senator Newton? Don't ask him to act. Just ask him to be aware of the issues that we're looking at and see what comments he might have about all this. And I think he's a straight up shooter, that he would tell us, hey, I'd let this thing die. I'd go ahead and approve phase 5, or hey, you know, we can go and we can take a shot at this, or we can see if we can talk to a couple of other people along the way. Is there any value to all of us to get Senator Newton, at least make him aware of how fickle they appear to be in their efforts?
The first question I can answer fairly straightforward, and that's the fact that we're looking at probably somewhere in the 12 to 24 months before we're ready to submit a permit package to the state for the next permit. You've got a lot of flow projections, you've got a study of the river that needs to be done, you've got a good bit of work that's going to take place. So you do have, that's not going to be submitted next year. That will be in most likely, I would think, in 23 time period. The second would be, there could be value to that. I would think that the way this would be handled next, if we proceeded with the state, would be an email saying we ran the numbers as you requested. Chuck has already put the email together, a draft email that is fairly firm but not confrontational to them, saying we still believe in our first number, is the way it starts out. But it says option 5 resulted in these results. Option 6, these results that are completely unacceptable and unreasonable could not be accepted by WSACC. And to get their feedback of whether they would go along with 5. If they're not willing to go along with 5, and they should be able to respond back to us fairly quickly with that, then I think we do have to accelerate it. But
I do think it's probably a good idea to bring Senator Newton up to speed. I don't think that can hurt to just.
And he is a quick learn on technical information.
So and this is very straightforward math to present and to look at. It's not a challenge. It would be very easy for him to pick up on.
I mean, he submitted many times to the Utilities Commission for rate increases and all that kind of stuff. So he's comfortable working with details and understanding them. So I think I think we'd be better served to at least have him involved in what's going on.
Is anyone else in the state going through this kind of analysis that we can leverage and join forces? And
I don't know who, if anybody, is going through this process right now.
I wonder if there's any way we can find out. Is there like a listserv for all the water and sewer authorities that is out there?
There is, but all of the state employees.
Well, I mean, you're just asking a question. Hey, what do you got? I mean, I don't know that it'd be throwing your cards on the table, just finding out what they're doing.
I can ask them if there's anybody else that's.
We can't be-
We know Charlotte is, but we've already seen their analysis, so.
Is this similar to ours, or are they having the same problem we're having?
Their analysis is very similar to ours, except that they didn't have this, the storm event that hit them didn't create this spike in flow. So.
And more area to distribute the water.
But there, we initially ran an analysis exactly as written in the administrative code on a month that had a hurricane. So the analysis gave us a number which was, I mean, you can't see it from here, but there's a number which was absurd. I mean, this red line right here was the average daily flow, and there's a hurricane. And there's the number they want us to use, 4 times our average flow. That's absurd. It's not the intent of the administrative code.
Well, at least it wasn't 6 or 8 times.
But it is important, the option 5 that we're submitting is exactly how Charlotte submitted, except it's the second wettest month instead of the first, the wettest month. Besides that, it's identical to the way Charlotte.
No reductions for II or anything. We're just using the next wettest month, which.
At their request.
Pretty much more true. Well, yeah.
And did they specifically request not to deduct for the event?
Yes.
They specifically said, well, if that wettest month is so bad, maybe we'll look at the second wettest month, run it exactly as prescribed by the code. And we did it. That's option or analysis number 5.
And what was extra frustrating, they told us when we got our first comments and had our virtual call with them, that, it just so happened the first submittal we had, the wettest month, had 2 named storms hit us. Over 10 inches of rain in a 10-day period that 2 named storms hit us. So as an instance, if you're gonna adjust for I&I, you had like 6 or 7 days worth of data you had to pull out. Okay, and then use the wetter days after that. They said, you just can't take that many days out. And so Chuck asked, well, how many days can you take out? And she said, well, I can understand if you have an event, you want to take maybe like a couple days out. That's reasonable. And they also said, and now you can use an updated data set. So that for Concord, for example, it was May of 2021 was the data. There's 3 days worth of data that we removed. But she said, removing several days of data is okay, not removing 5, 6, or 7 days. We did exactly what she told us to do and came back and said, no, that's you can't remove all that I like that. It's exactly what you said to do, but you didn't like the result. So now you change the game. And they may very well do this with option 5 again. And if that's so, then there's really no path forward to work it out with staff. There's not.
So is there an appeal process to anybody?
Not normally.
You can always sue an administrative agency saying they acted arbitrary capriciously, but the better solution to get relief.
Yep.
Newton had a hearing recently. They approved the new head of things. The transcript part of it I listened to, in which she pledges to work with Newton and other people in the legislature to make sure that they're not an impediment to progress in business and economic growth. We've got the same things that they're able to do in making decisions, which is to use their opinion to actually decide something. In their administrative agency, the guy comes in there, he feels differently about something else, and he says, Chuck did the same thing and got it approved. They got that same type of latitude could work in our favor in terms of trying to get relief from paper allocation to practical allocation and give us credit for coming online. We need more flow, we need more availability than we're going to have. You can have construction up there for that. Yeah. Okay. We're 2.5 years out. So we got to figure out something. Newton would be somebody who could help us do that. Williams talked to the But there's no, as you know, right now, litigation is not a solution to any problem. There's nobody, no, I'm serious, there's nobody that's above, the guys they're talking to, people they're working with, they have no one above them except their director. And if their director, she were to say, no, shame on you, that's bad, or however it's done, that's one way. But otherwise, you'd have to go to court and say they're acting, they're not enforcing the rules, and none of that's desirable. But that latitude that they have to make that decision is the same latitude that we may be able to use to give us some leeway as we're bringing our flow on our capacity up so that we have more flow available to us. But that's a concerted effort to do. But your solution right now is they got to make these people happy. If they can't make them happy, you've got no solution except a political solution. A litigation solution would work.
I got a question. I got a question that kind of goes down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it's relevant, I think, and that's related to the expansion. When we're going to talk about the update, I could ask this question, but I think it's relevant now. So what are the prospects of us pursuing a larger expansion in both phases than what we're currently planned? Is permitting is the big challenge there, and money? I mean, those are the two. Or is there an engineering reason why we can't double what we're pursuing now, other than the process of going through the permitting and the money that it'll cost?
Right. The permitting is the issue there. We have a permit for 34 inches. The process to get a permit above 34 is a 3 to 4 year process. Now, politically, who knows what could happen, but that would be quite unusual for there to be something of that order of magnitude to be pulled. So I don't think there's a quick path to get a permit above 34 in GD.
Well, I guess the reason that's relevant is obviously if we were to pursue that immediately, then that's going to dovetail in this short-term decision a little bit. If we say, well, we want to do this at the same time concurrently, obviously we want their support on both, but since it's the same people, all I know is we look at our numbers, and when we finish this second phase, we don't have enough for, capacity for what we have on the books now, much less what. So, is there a scenario where we're pursuing that immediately? Not in 2023, but immediately,
Right. For there to be a permit obtained much faster than a 3 to 4 year typical window, it would involve different people than we're dealing with on this project.
Sure.
Right here. It would evolve above them.
Yeah, right.
It would not be driven by them.
This is all being handled, Chuck, out of Raleigh.
Yes.
So Mooresville has nothing to do with it. Okay.
I mean, we need this now. I mean, there's no other. It has to be now.
And honestly, as soon as June would be the time to look again. Do we adjust this number as soon as June to look back at that? Because that would be when the May 2021, so far, July, we haven't had major rain events, floods, big flows at the plant, June, July, August. Now we still got 9 months left, 8.5 months left, so a lot can happen. But as soon as June would be the time when it would make sense to try to adjust that number.
And that's based solely on weather patterns. If the state is going to apply a different interpretation of this code going forward, then it needs to include an I&I component, not just a contributory component for the customer. If it's going to include I&I, everybody would be well served to do what they can to reduce I&I, to get those spikes down. So those reoccurring things are they're going to be there as long as we have infiltration and inflow events associated with older, larger collection system components. So you got to chase those things too.
So as far as just waiting for this wettest month to fall off, what is the process between now and then? Do we move ahead with option 5? to at least get the numbers lower and then just redo this all again
Keep looking at it.
next June?
Make a justification 6 months, a year from now, whatever, make a justification that, hey, we've been doing what we can to get rid of I, we got some spikes down, and that, that data set from back then was super wet because it was a really wet year. This is more like reality and reapply.
Well, we've had this application process going on now for 2 years,
Submitted in April.
We actually,
this past April.
right, we actually started looking at this as a process some time ago, and waiting to, yeah.
So were you saying, Chad, that we have to wait until next June before they would automatically adjust in case we wound up with a much drier year? Or do we have to make application for that adjustment at that point in time? So there's nothing automatic that's going to happen. I mean, the fact that we're right now utilizing 19 million gallons of capacity and we have a paper number of 26 and a half. Okay. At what point can we argue about the difference between those two and how we can adjust those two?
Yeah, well, we're actually, our yearly average is closer to 22 versus 26 and a half. And then we have over 4 million gallons of paper capacity that has been allocated that is not yet connected. And that's where our available paper capacity comes in. So you take that 4 million and you reduce it because you go from 120 to, I've been saying 70, whatever those numbers are now, that goes from 4 million to 3 million. And that's where that extra million gallons of paper capacity becomes available.
So if we stayed for a much drier several months and we don't have another main rain event, and does that number get adjusted down from 22 to 21 or to 19 or whatever the right number happens to be?
Right.
And then what do we have to do to make sure they know that's the right number that we're working?
It's on the paperwork that we submit with a flow request, flow acceptance. So we track that. Every time we submit flow acceptance paperwork to the state or to the jurisdictions, it has all those numbers on it. And so, for example, even if we end this year with the exact same flow that we had last year, we ended up at 21.92, okay? Everything that's come online, once we get, especially after we have flow factor reduction and settle all that with the state, everything that came online from July 1 through the end of this year will be available to be reallocated. So if 500,000, 700,000, 400,000 gallons per day of projects came online the second half of this year, then that will be available to be allocated in January.
You're saying, but if the flow stays the
If the
same.
flow stays the same. Because in theory, the way this is supposed to work, you're putting out flow allocation based on what it's actually going to flow. So then as it comes online, it's now in the flow. So when it came online this year, next year it's in the flow number. Well, what happens when you're allocating 120 gallons per day per bedroom and it's only flowing 48 gallons per day per bedroom, then when that million gallons a day comes online, it's only flowing 400,000 gallons,
So we're sort of just,
450,000 gallons. So you get 600,000 gallons of capacity.
should we plan that way? I mean, should we, not with Diener or with DEQ or any of that, but for us, I mean, should we sort of do those calculations collectively?
It's very hard to do because you don't know what rainfall is going to do and how it's going to affect your flows at the plant.
We have some sense because we've done some analysis, I guess.
We do. And what's the most likely scenario if we were to return to a more normal rainfall pattern, which we've kind of been in this year,
Right.
that you just don't see your flow really going up. It really doesn't go down, maybe, but it doesn't really go up. But all these connections are being made. And if they're being made and your flow is not going up, then that flow becomes available to be reallocated. It's hard to quantify for next year. Is that going to be 200,000 gallons? Is it going to be 800,000 gallons? Because you don't know how fast stuff's coming online. You don't know how much what your actual flow is going to be. It's tough to quantify, but there will be, in all likelihood, increments of flow. Some may be being small, some may be being bigger coming online.
But if we couple all that with significant I&I improvements over that same period, then,
Should help.
you know, we probably create capacity. And that was my question last week. I'm not sure I fully understand. Is that a better investment or expansion, the better investment. But
That's the discussion we keep having. They keep saying we can't quantify what we will get out of
I've never found an engineer that's willing to answer that question.
But you did say a few minutes ago that it's to our benefit to reduce those spikes that we have.
Right.
And that if we could find a way to tighten up our system so that there's only one spike that we have to wait to fall off the list instead of 3 spikes that has to
Or
be.
all the spikes get a little lower.
Yeah, or all of them get a little bit lower.
3
in the
times, not
process.
4 times.
We are benefiting because we're always going to have to deal with this number
Right.
all the time.
So the dodgy question then is how much capacity we gain for how many dollars in I work? And that's it's very hard to we just really don't know.
So to me, on the question at hand, I think what you said about the email you have drafted, we still believe in our 70 number and I think it follows the code and how we should have calculated it. But we should submit option 5 to me. Get some reduction, appreciate that additional allocation or additional capacity and then come back in June and look at it again.
That would be my recommendation to the board. With the asterisk that we may get another left field response from the state, and if we do, that's when we engage Senator Newton, and we don't wait around to do that. We move quickly with that.
Well, I'm not sure that Daryl's far off base even saying to get these actual numbers and at least make him aware, and really not
How
asking. him to
fickle
really
they're
do it.
being in the process.
Right,
Yeah, I mean, at this point, leave it up to him to decide if he wants to get engaged or
right.
not.
Right,
based
let
on
him make his own decision.
Yeah.
I like that idea. I think it doesn't sound like it is very difficult to pull together those bullet points we're talking about and just let him see them and see how it's going to affect him to say, yeah, let me get involved in this, or hey, let's give this 5 a chance to see what they do with 5. In the meantime, he's still got in the back of his head all this fickleness that they're playing games.
Can you just summarize option 5 one more time, just sort of the basics, just so I understand exactly what we're talking about?
So option 5, they had us moving to the second last month of the year.
Okay.
We did not make any adjustments for I in that data set. It's the 3 highest days of the year. Okay, month. 3 highest days of the month. We took out the non-residential component of flow for that month. Okay. We adjusted that non-residential flow based on those 3 days, those max 3 days compared to your yearly average flow, okay, because they're elevated compared to your yearly average flow to get a peaking factor that we apply to that non-residential flow. Because if your residential flow is peaked, so is your non-residential flow. We subtracted that to get what's our residential component, divided that by the number of residential connections in each jurisdiction, and then the number of bedrooms per connection that was calculated to get that number of gallons per bedroom per day. That came out to be 82 gallons per day for Concord, 68 gallons per day for Kannapolis, 58 gallons per day for Harrisburg, and 93 gallons per day per bedroom for Mount Pleasant.
And what's your thoughts about why they're so different? Is there anything that jumps out that says, that's it?
Well, for example, I think when you look at Concord versus Kannapolis, okay, Concord, because of the spread out as their system is, their system tends to peak longer, okay? It doesn't peak as fast as Kannapolis does, but it peaks for longer. So that day after the rain, Kannapolis may have been back down here.
Okay.
And Concord's still up here. So when you're only looking at those 3 days, it just seemed like that storm event kind of lasted longer in Concord
But what,
than it did.
that makes sense for Harrisburg, but what about Mount Pleasant for Harrisburg?
Mount Pleasant, and as we know, that Mount Pleasant has put in, is getting ready to do a lot of work to their system. There's been, and they've done work, but there's more work to be done to address some I within the Mount Pleasant system down there. And then they're hurt by the fact that there's only 3.1 bedrooms per connection that had to be used, whereas everybody else was 3.5 to 3.7. That affected Mount Pleasant's number as well. So if they could have used the 3.5 number that Concord used instead of 3.1, they would have probably been right there kind of.
Why do they have to use that?
Well, we had to calculate the number of bedrooms that an average connection has in that jurisdiction. And that was different for each jurisdiction. And they prescribed to us how they wanted us to do that.
They understand that we're one system and one, it seems very isolated that, but whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So we'll proceed with submitting and getting feedback on option 5.
And get a summary from you of all the details so we can share them with Senator Newton
Yes, we'll do that for sure.
without asking him to act at all,
Right.
just letting him make his own decision.
Right, that's correct.
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right. Thank you.
You ready? Yep. Move to request approval to designate Christopher Tucker.
Well, I'll ask Christopher to come up to the podium so you can meet Christopher. Christopher comes to us from the city of Statesville. He was their finance director. He's previously worked at the town of Matthews as their finance director, and the town of Ayton as their finance director. Glad to have him. I'm slowly turning things loose and getting everything turned over to him in the finance area. We're going to turn budgeting and all those things over to him over time, and hopefully be ready for succession in a year or so. So getting ready to turn those reins loose on that. So introduce Christopher, and I ask that you appoint him officially as the finance officer for carrying out the duties under General Statute 159, 25 and 24.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Got a motion on the floor, probably seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Appreciate the opportunity.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, request approval for a large list of items. I can read that, but I'll let Mark read it. Chad.
Well, here we are talking about I&I. So here's our first item on the agenda, second item on the agenda. We're asking to award the bid phase services for the Lower Back Creek Interceptor Rehab. The actual engineering amount is $37,000, but I'm asking for $50,000 to cover some incidentals. Right now, the estimate is about $2 million when we come back with a formal design for the project. So we're asking for approval for the award of design services to Fraser Engineering. And we're asking for a CPO, capital project ordinance for $50,000 for this project, and amending the operating budget to transfer $50,000 over to the capital project ordinance. Chad's here to answer any questions you may have on what they intend to do.
I can give a quick background of the area and while we're working in that area if you'd like, or we can proceed.
What kind of time schedule we're looking at for the actual bid?
It's going to be
Request for bid.
it'll be a pretty straightforward, fairly quick. I'd say 3 to 6 month design. So I would imagine, by winter, spring, we'll be looking to bid that work out.
So we'll get another bite of the apple once you bring the bid back to us, and we have to make a final decision about that, where you can clarify and detail all the rest of the information.
Correct. And the $2 million, I think has been estimated. We hope on the higher side of once they get into design, that everything there might not be needed, but there's 2 sewer lines there that parallel each other. Several of them's gonna have to have the lining work done into it. There's been a lot of impacts to those over due to pump station discharges over the years, and just a lot of corrosion that's on those manholes and the lines themselves. And there is I&I issues out there, but also structural issues just to protect our facilities as well.
Do one motion. We need them all.
One or four, three.
You can do one, cover them all if you'd like.
I'm taking a motion to cover all 3.
So moved.
Got a motion on the floor?
Second.
Probably seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. request for approval for requested pre-construction services, amount to Crowder Construction.
Right, well, as presented last month, we're meeting with selected Crowder Construction, and teamed with Brown and Caldwell to implement the progressive design build of the expansion of Rocky River. Last month, the board awarded an interim pre-construction services amount that allowed the team to continue moving and moving forward. WSACC and Crowder did receive the PER. I believe that was August 31st. We received that PER. That was about I think 198 page document and 196 drawings that came in that package. So it was quite the package that was delivered for the expansion of the plant. We have completed a review of that and Crowder is currently reviewing that as well. We have discussed quite a few of the comments and concerns and questions and everything else as a group multiple times now. So that work has been ongoing. We did work with Crowder to develop the full pre-construction services as outlined in the scope of work that would be involved with getting this project to a 60% design, the point where a 60% cost estimate can be produced, and the first GMP packages and what those would look like can be assembled and put together. I do have here George we have seen many times here over the last year or two. With Brown Caldwell is here, and then Derek with Crowder Construction is here to answer the questions you guys have about what will take place over the scope of work that's just laid out here. Be happy to answer any questions that you have. I did want to clearly indicate here that the $4.927 million total amount does include the $550,000 that was awarded last month. So the actual amount being added to their PO is the $4.377 million. So be happy to take any questions.
I read through this thing earlier today, and there were several references to the electrical upgrade that we're kind of putting in tandem with the plant expansion. Do we have any idea of kind of how that's going to work? Because we don't have a solid plan on the electrical upgrade.
So that's a great question. I wanted to bring that up. We do view both WSACC and the team view that it makes a lot of sense for these projects to be done together, to be folded into one project. Crowder, which Derek can probably speak to, has extensive experience within their own staffing with electrical projects and within water treatment plants. It's right up their alley, work to be done. So we're really going to be trying to figure out as a team how we fold that together. Southeastern Electrical has been our consultant on that. Southeastern's worked with Brown and Caldwell here over the last year, kind of making sure the electrical design works with the planet's design, and has worked with Crowder before. You know, they all know each other. They all work together a lot. So bringing that together will be pretty easily done. But I do see that being combined into one project and work together. That effort is not included in this. That would be added once we figure out how that relationship. Because really it comes down to Southeastern keep working for WSACC, and we're dealing with WSACC and they're working with the team, or do they just get folded in under Brown and Caldwell through Crowder, and they're just working seamlessly, really, without our oversight. I mean, ultimate oversight, but not our coordination. That coordination is being handled by the team, which probably makes the most sense from being as efficient as possible in getting it installed and completed. But we will be working that out and coming back to the board with what that would look like.
My question, Chad, is when do you anticipate the first presentation back to this board from Brown Caldwell and Goodrum as to what they've already discovered and what they're looking at and how things going to go forward? Because obviously we really wanted this thing to be done urgently. So the question is, how quickly can we expect something back? A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah. There will be, I'm envisioning an extensive presentation next month. The Brown Caldwell and Crowderman is working through the 30% cost estimate based off of the PER that's been submitted. Along with that is a cash flow analysis that they're doing for Michael and for Christopher to give them an understanding of how they envision the cash flow looking like over this project. And also I'll look at where are our critical paths, where are our pinch points and what can we do about it? Where are those challenges located? I'm envisioning that presentation taking place next month. There's some really interesting stuff I'll be able to present to us, 3D modeling showing exactly what these facilities are going to look like on our site to give you a real good feel of what this looks like. It's one thing to say a 5 million gallon a day or 5 million gallon tank with a 1 million gallon tank inside of it. But when you actually start getting into the dimensions and the size of what some of this stuff is, 32-foot sidewall, I don't know how big is it in diameter and huge, just unbelievable. It will be, we're planning on that for next month.
Okay, good.
But if you have direct questions for them, they are here. And I'm sure we'd be happy to answer any questions you have tonight.
Any questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the request of pre-construction services not to Crowder Construction.
Second.
A motion on the floor, properly seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carries. Michael, you back up with some more approvals.
Asking you to amend the capital project ordinance for the plant expansion and for the transfer money from the system development fee fund. The amount of $4,500,000, which was cover the difference between what you already appropriated and the contract amount, plus a small amount for other incidental expenses.
Motion to approve.
Got a motion on the floor.
Second.
Properly seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carries. Go to public comments. Anybody on the phone? Anybody in the room? And here now we'll entertain a motion to go into closed session for GS 143, 318, 11A1, A3, and A4.
So move, Mr.
Got a
Chairman.
motion on the floor, properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Who stands?
enough, but I know the motion, but I was just wondering if either Daryl or Dave wanted to make the motion. I mean, honestly, you two have put up with this the longest and been the loudest in a good way. I don't mean
It's
that in a
gonna be
bad way at
painful
all.
for him to do it, though. I think he's gonna want to do it.
I'm just wondering.
Either of them want to do it.
Feel like they're giving up.
It's about half price.
Hold your nose.
I mean, I'll be glad to do it, but I just wondered if one of you wanted to.
I'm short-term anyway, so you do it.
All right. So I would make a motion that we accept the settlement agreement of 8.25 million based on the settlement agreement release as drafted by our attorneys, including the amendments they presented.
Good.
Yeah, that's all.
Second.
Properly second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye. Anything else we need to get while we're hanging late?
Move to adjourn.
Got a motion on the floor?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So you need these agreements back?